It's June 10th, 2024. It's 4:17 in the afternoon. I'm standing in the music room of a Belle Meade mansion that hasn't heard music in 16 years, and I'm about to turn a small brass key I've been working toward for almost 4 weeks. Sienna Bowmont, the woman who owns this house, and the independent record label her grandmother built 66 years ago in downtown Nashville, is standing 6 feet behind me with her arms crossed and her bottom lip caught between her teeth. She made a joke when I first started this job back in May. She said, in front of her assistant and an attorney she had trusted since she was a child, that if I could actually get this old thing working again, she'd kiss me. Everyone laughed. I didn't say anything. I never say anything when people who don't know me try to turn me into the joke. What none of us in that room understood, including her, was that the song this jukebox was set to play first when somebody finally turned that key was a song her grandmother had sung into a microphone in Memphis in November of 1961. Oh, a song that had never been heard by anyone outside of 2 people, both of whom were dead. And what nobody knew except the woman who had been gone for 5 years was what she'd hidden in the cabinet behind the selection card holder, sealed in an envelope she'd written her granddaughter's name on with the careful, slow handwriting of a person who knew she was running out of time. I turn the key. The mechanism engages. The first thing Sienna hears in 16 years from this jukebox is her grandmother's voice. The second thing, once the song ends and I open the cabinet panel to show her what I found wedged behind the selection mechanism, is the truth about a man her family had trusted for 38 years, who had been quietly taking from them the entire time. But to understand what happened in that music room on June 10th, I need to take you back to Thursday, May 16th, the day I walked into that house for the first time. My name is Jonah Hartley. I'm 39 years old. I live with my 6-year-old nephew, Matteo, in a small 2-bedroom rental house on Greenwood Avenue in East Nashville, about a 15-minute drive from the workshop I own on Trinity Lane. The workshop is called Hartley Restoration and Mechanical Arts. It's a converted auto body building with 2 work bays, a back room I use for storage, and a small front area where customers come in when they want to discuss what they've brought me. I've been in that building since March of 2022. I specialize in electromechanical restoration. That means I work on machines from a particular era, roughly 1935 through the late 1970s, that combine mechanical movement with electrical components. Jukeboxes are my main work, but I also restore pinball machines, slot machines from the pre-electronic era, antique radios, and the occasional player piano mechanism. There aren't many of us left who do this work seriously. The community is small, mostly older men in the Midwest and the South, and we know each other by reputation. I learned the trade at Rowe AME Restoration Services in Detroit, where I worked from 2008 to October 2021. I spent 13 years there, the last 6 as senior bench technician. I would probably still be there now if my sister Rebecca and her husband David hadn't been killed in a car accident on Interstate 65 near Bowling Green, Kentucky, on October 28, 2021. They were driving back from a wedding. A driver who had been awake for 31 hours fell asleep at the wheel and crossed the median. Rebecca died at the scene. David died at the Medical Center Hospital in Bowling Green 4 hours later. Matteo, 3 years and 7 months old at the time, was at their friend Loretta Briggs's house in Nashville with a sitter. I drove down from Detroit the night I got the call. I never went back. I'm not Matteo's biological father, I'm his uncle. But I'm what he has. The custody process took most of 2022, but it was uncontested. Rebecca had named me in her will when Matteo was born. David's parents in Florida had agreed without any disagreement. By June of 2022, the legal paperwork was finalized, and Matteo had been calling me Uncle Jonah since the moment he was old enough to talk, so we kept it that way. The morning this story starts, May 16, 2024, was a Thursday. I made Matteo waffles. He ate them with too much syrup. He had his backpack ready by the door because he always did. He carried his father's harmonica in the inside pocket of his jacket. Not to play, he couldn't play yet. He just liked to know it was there. I walked him to Mrs. Loretta Briggs's house at 7:40. Loretta had been Rebecca's closest friend, was 62 now, widowed, and watched Matteo before and after school. She always had coffee ready for me. We talked for about 3 minutes. Matteo went inside. I drove the rest of the way to the workshop and opened up at 8 o'clock. The phone call came at 9:34. The voice on the other end was warm, professional, and had the kind of careful Southern cadence that some Nashville executives have learned to deploy with strangers. "Mr. Hartley? My name is Naomi Carter. I'm calling from Bell Tower Records on Music Row. I'm Miss Bowmont's executive assistant." "Yes, ma'am." "Mr. Hartley, Miss Bowmont has a 1962 Wurlitzer jukebox in her home in Belle Meade. It belonged to her grandmother. It hasn't played in something close to 16 years, and she has finally decided she'd like to try to bring it back. Your name came up through a referral from Mr. Henry Caldwell at the Tennessee State Museum's Preservation Department." I knew Henry Caldwell. I had consulted with him twice in 2023 on antique radio mechanisms in the museum's collection. He was careful about referrals. "What model is the Wurlitzer?" "I'm told it's a model 2700. A 2700 was a 1962 unit. Stereo. 50 selections on 45 revolutions per minute records. One of Wurlitzer's last fully American-produced models before manufacturing changes started shifting the industry." "Is it in the home?" "Yes, in the music room on the first floor. It has not been moved in approximately 52 years. I'd need to come look at it. I can be in Belle Meade by 2:30 this afternoon if that works for Miss Bowmont." "That works. The address is on Linwood Boulevard. I'll text you the gate information once we hang up. Miss Bowmont will be there, and her family attorney, Mr. Crawford, may also be present. He's there this afternoon for a separate matter, but he asked to be informed." "Understood, Miss Carter." I hung up. I sat at the workbench for a minute. A 1962 Wurlitzer 27. That hadn't played in 16 years, in a Belle Meade home. I'd seen maybe 42 7/0s in my career. 2 of them had been in the kind of condition where they were never coming back. The rest had been recoverable with proper work. I cleaned up, changed into a button-down shirt with the workshop logo, and made sure my notebook and basic diagnostic tools were in the truck. Belle Meade is the wealthiest neighborhood in Nashville. It sits about 8 miles southwest of downtown, on the other side of Vanderbilt University, in an area that has been old money since the 1930s. The houses are mostly Tudor, Colonial Revival, and Georgian, set back from the road on lots that average 2 acres or more. I had been into Belle Meade exactly twice before, both times for estate sales where I was looking for parts. The Beaumont address was on Linwood Boulevard, a quieter street even by Belle Meade standards. The gate code worked. The driveway curved through mature hardwood trees for about 300 feet before the house appeared. It was a 1920s Tudor with ivy-covered stone, slate roof, and the unmistakable look of a house that had been in the same family long enough that it no longer needed to perform. Beautiful, but unflashy. A woman opened the front door before I made it to the steps. She was in a cream blouse and tan slacks, late 40s, with the bearing of an assistant who had been good at her job for a long time. "Mr. Hartley?" "Yes, ma'am. Naomi?" "Please, come in. Miss Bowmont is in the music room with Mr. Crawford." I stepped inside. The interior was warm wood, oriental rugs that had probably been there since the 1950s, a curved staircase, and the faint smell of lemon oil and old paper. Naomi led me through a sitting room into a slightly smaller room on the east side of the house. South-facing windows, dark walnut floor, a baby grand piano against one wall, 2 leather chairs in front of an unlit fireplace, and on the wall opposite the piano, the Wurlitzer. It was unmistakable even at 16 years of silence. The chrome had dulled, but not corroded. The colored plastic dome on top had yellowed slightly. The selection card holder behind the curved glass was full of original handwritten cards. The cabinet wood was in remarkable condition. Clearly the room had stayed climate-controlled. A woman in a navy dress was sitting on one of the leather chairs. She had dark blonde hair pulled back, a coffee cup in her hand, and a phone face down on her knee. She stood up when I came in. "You must be Mr. Hartley." "Jonah is fine, ma'am." "Sienna Bowmont. This is Theodore Crawford, my family's attorney." The man rose from the other leather chair more slowly. 64 years old, silver hair combed back, navy blazer, a Tennessee bar lapel pin, the particular handshake of an attorney who had been shaking hands in Nashville since 1985. "Theodore, please, Teddy." "Sir?" I turned my attention back to the Wurlitzer. I didn't approach it immediately. I stood about 8 feet away and looked at it for a moment. Sienna noticed. "Is something wrong?" "No, ma'am. I'm just looking at it before I touch it. Once I start, I want to know what was here when I started." "Of course. Take whatever time you need." I walked around the unit. I checked the rear panel access. I looked at the floor underneath for any signs of leakage or rodent activity over the years. None. The room had been kept clean. I unlatched the front access panel and looked at the mechanism. The selection arm was at rest, the turntable was in its home position, and the amplifier chassis was visible behind a service door. I took out my flashlight. I looked at the tubes first. 2 of them showed visible darkening at the bases, likely degraded. The drive belt was visible from the rear and had clearly stiffened with age, probably no longer able to grip properly. The selection mechanism's solenoid contacts were going to need cleaning. The wiring harness looked surprisingly clean. No rodent damage, no corroded connections that I could see from the front. I straightened up. Mechanically, this is in better shape than I expected for 16 years of silence. Whoever stored it kept the room dry and climate-controlled. The damage is mostly going to be in the rubber components. The drive belt is shot. Probably a couple of capacitors will need replacement. 2 tubes look weak. The selection mechanism will need a complete cleaning and lubrication, but that's expected for this period. How long? 3 to 4 weeks of part-time work. I'd want to transport it to my workshop on Trinity Lane in East Nashville to do the restoration properly. I have the test equipment there, and it'll be easier than working out of a truck. I can have it back here in finished condition. Quote is $6,000, including parts if everything I expect to need is available. Could come in lower if some components surprise me. Sienna nodded. And the records inside? They were the selections that came with it originally? I'd need to check, but if this Wurlitzer has been undisturbed since 1962, those will be the original 40s, yes. I'd recommend leaving them in place during the restoration, so we can test a playback when it's done. Crawford made a small sound. He had been watching the conversation with the patience of a man waiting to be useful. "Sienna, dear, are we sure this is worth $6,000 for what is essentially a piece of furniture? The estate has certain limits, and there are other priorities we should be considering." I noticed 3 things in that sentence. The first was that he had called the Wurlitzer a piece of furniture. A 1962 Wurlitzer 2700, in original condition with original 45s, sold properly at auction, would bring somewhere between $18,000 and $28,000 depending on provenance. Calling it furniture wasn't ignorance from a man who had been around Bowmont assets for decades. It was something else. The second was the phrase, "The estate has certain limits." The Wurlitzer wasn't part of an estate. Margaret Bowmont had died 5 years ago. Her assets had presumably been distributed or trust-held by now. If he was still calling Sienna's mansion's contents the estate, that suggested he was operating in a financial framework where Sienna's personal property was still under his administrative reach. The third was Sienna's reaction. She didn't react with anger or surprise. She reacted with the very slight tightening of a person who had been hearing that kind of comment from Crawford for long enough that it didn't surprise her anymore, but did, just slightly, tire her. She turned to Crawford and gave him the smile of a Southern woman who had decided, "Teddy, I appreciate that. It's $6,000. I'd like to bring my grandmother's jukebox back to life. Please don't make this difficult." "Of course, dear." She turned back to me. The amusement in her eyes returned, with a small edge of something that had been provoked by Crawford's interruption. "Mr. Hartley, if you can actually get that old thing playing again after 16 years, I might just have to kiss you when it's done." Naomi laughed once, brief and warm. Crawford produced a smile that did not move past his mouth. I latched the front access panel of the Wurlitzer carefully. I wiped my hands on a shop rag from my back pocket. "I'll have it picked up next Thursday, ma'am, May 23rd. I'll bring it back when it's finished." "That sounds wonderful." I did not respond to the joke. I shook her hand. I shook Naomi's hand. I gave Crawford a short nod. I walked out. I sat in the truck for a minute before I started the engine. I was thinking about Crawford's word choice and Sienna's tired tightening at it, and the fact that neither of those reactions had anything to do with me or the Wurlitzer, and that I was probably about to find myself in something larger than a $6,000 restoration job. I started the truck. I drove back to East Nashville. The Wurlitzer arrived at my workshop on Thursday, May 23, 2024, at 11:15 in the morning, transported on a specialty moving service I had recommended. I had cleared Bay 2 for it. We secured it to the work platform, leveled it, and the movers were gone by noon. I started the restoration that afternoon. The first week was diagnostic. I documented everything before touching anything. Photographs of every angle, notes on every original component, careful labeling of every wire I would eventually need to disconnect. By Friday of the first week, I had confirmed my initial assessment was correct. Drive belt, replace. Tubes, 2 needed replacement, 2 more were marginal and should be replaced as preventive. Selection solenoids, full cleaning and relubrication. Capacitors, 3 needed replacement, including one in the amplifier section that had developed slight bulging. Cosmetic work, chrome polish, cabinet conditioning, replacement of 2 pieces of yellowed plastic on the dome corners. Period-correct reproductions were available from a supplier in Wisconsin I had worked with for years. I ordered the parts on Friday afternoon. They arrived the following Tuesday. It was during the second week, while I was cleaning the selection mechanism, that I first noticed something specific about the selection card layout. The Wurlitzer 2700 came from the factory with a standardized template for selection cards. The cards themselves were typed or hand-lettered by whoever owned the unit, but the slot organization was consistent. A1 through A10 along the top row, B1 through B10 in the second row, and so on. The card in slot A1 had been handwritten by someone with careful, slow handwriting. It read, Maggie's Song, 1961. That was unusual on 2 counts. First, Maggie, rather than the artist's full name. Second, the year written on the card, rather than just the song title. Every other card in the selection holder followed the standard format. Song title on top, artist name underneath. Bobby Bland, Patsy Cline, Ray Charles, Brenda Lee, Sam Cooke, Conway Twitty. Names you'd expect for a Nashville area jukebox in 1962. Only A1 was different? I opened the front of the unit and slid the record holder rack out far enough to see the 45 in slot A1. It was a custom acetate, not a commercial pressing. The label was hand-typed on a paper Wurlitzer template. It said, recorded at Sun Studio Annex, Memphis, November 1961, MB. I stood there for a moment. Sun Studio in Memphis was where Elvis Presley had cut his first recordings in 1954. By 1961, the original Sun Studio location on Union Avenue had been mostly inactive, but several annex recording facilities had operated under affiliated arrangements during that period. The recordings from those annex sessions were rarely released commercially. They were often custom acetates pressed for the artist or for promotional purposes. M.B. Margaret Beaumont. I pulled out my phone. I opened my notes. I had researched the Wurlitzer's history before starting the restoration. That was standard practice for any high-value vintage unit. I had a brief background on Margaret Beaumont. Founded Bell Tower Records in 1958, ran it for 61 years, died in 2019 at age 84. Her first husband, William Hartley, no relation to me, had died in 1972. There was a name in my research notes I had jotted down because of its Memphis connection. Walter Briggs, age 73, retired Memphis recording studio owner, son of a man named Henry Briggs, who had run a small Memphis annex studio in the early 1960s. I called Walter Briggs. The phone rang 4 times. A man's voice answered with the slow, deliberate cadence of a Southerner who had grown up in the Mississippi Delta and never lost the rhythm. Briggs. Mr. Briggs, my name is Jonah Hartley. I'm a restoration specialist in Nashville. I was given your name by Henry Caldwell at the State Museum as someone who might be able to help me with a historical question. Henry Caldwell, I'll be. He's still working over there? Yes, sir. Tell me what you need, Mr. Hartley. I'm restoring a 1962 Wurlitzer 270. Oh, that belonged to Margaret Beaumont of Bell Tower Records here in Nashville. I'm finding what looks like a one-off acetate in the A1 selection slot. The label reads, Sun Studio Annex, Memphis, November 1961, MB. Does that mean anything to you? There was a long pause. Mr. Hartley, yes, that means something to me. I waited. My father's studio. He ran an annex operation under license from Sam Phillips's people from 1959 through 1964. Margaret Beaumont came in to record one afternoon in November 1961. I was 10 years old. I remember her because she was the most polished woman I had ever seen in my father's studio, and because she paid in cash, in full, before the session started, which my father said was a sign of either very serious money or very serious nervousness. What did she record? One song. She wrote it herself, words and music. She had a piano accompaniment played by a session musician from Memphis whose name I cannot recall. She sang in a low alto. The song was about regret and the South in time, and it was, my father told me later, the best song he had ever produced in that little annex studio. He pressed 3 acetates for her on a custom press he had set up that year. 1 copy for her, 1 as backup, and 1 she requested specifically be saved for him. She told my father, this is the exact phrase I remember her saying because my father repeated it the rest of his life. Henry, if this gets pressed and released commercially, it will be on my own label, or it will not be released at all. And it never was released. It never was. She founded Bell Tower Records officially in 1958, so by 1961 the label existed, but for whatever reason, and I have a private theory about this, she chose never to commercially release her own voice. The 2 copies of the acetate she took with her, I never knew what happened to them. My father kept his copy until he died in 1994. After his death, the copy was lost in an estate sale. I have spent decades wondering whether any of the 3 acetates still existed. One of them is in the A1 slot of a Wurlitzer in Belle Meade right now. A long pause. Mr. Hartley, where exactly are you, and how soon would you allow me to drive to Nashville? I'm in East Nashville, but before you drive over, I should tell you something else. I haven't played the acetate. I'm doing the restoration first. I want to bring it back to Miss Beaumont's home and let her hear it through the Wurlitzer the way her grandmother intended. There was a longer pause. That is the right way to do it. That is the right way. Mr. Briggs, may I ask you a question? Anything. Did Margaret Beaumont ever come back to your father's old studio, or to you, in the years after? She did. She came to Memphis in early 2018. I was 67. She would have been 83. She was a delicate woman by then, but her mind was sharp. She brought one of her acetates with her. She asked me if I would have it transferred to a digital file. She said she wanted a copy of the recording to exist somewhere safe, in case anything happened to the physical disc. I did the transfer myself in my home studio. I have the digital file. It has been on a private drive ever since. Did she say why she wanted it preserved? She said, and this is a direct quote from a woman I had not seen in over 50 years and never saw again. There's a person in my life I want to hear this someday when she's ready. She did not say who. I did not ask. She thanked me. She paid me in cash again. She drove back to Nashville the same day. I never saw her again. She died the next year. I sat down at my workbench. The Wurlitzer's selection mechanism was disassembled in front of me. The acetate was in my hand. Mr. Briggs, would you be willing to come to Nashville on the day I deliver this to Miss Beaumont? She is going to need to hear what you just told me, in your own words. I will be there. You give me the date and the time, I will be there. I gave him my number and told him I'd update him as the restoration progressed. I hung up. I sat with the acetate for a long time. I put it back in its protective sleeve. I returned it to slot A1. I closed the record holder. I went back to work on the selection mechanism. I did not play the acetate. Walter had been right. It wasn't mine to hear first. By the end of the 3rd week, the restoration was nearly complete. The drive belt had been replaced. The tubes were new. The capacitors were installed. The selection mechanism moved smoothly and the solenoids responded crisply to test commands. The amplifier was within original specifications on the bench test. The chrome had been polished, the cabinet had been conditioned with the same wood treatment that had been used in the 1960s, and the 2 yellowed plastic corner pieces had been replaced with period-correct reproductions. The unit was, in mechanical and electrical terms, restored. I had not yet played a record on it. I called Sienna's office on Wednesday, June 5th. Naomi answered. I told her the restoration was complete, that I was ready to redeliver and reinstall, and that I would like to arrange a return appointment. Miss Bowmont will be home Monday afternoon. Would 2 o'clock on Monday, June 10th, work? That works. I would like to bring an additional guest, with Miss Bowmont's permission. His name is Walter Briggs. He's 73 years old, retired Memphis recording studio owner. He knew Miss Bowmont's grandmother in the 1960s. There's some historical context about the Wurlitzer that he'll be able to share with her better than I can. I'll ask her and get back to you. Naomi called back 40 minutes later. Sienna was glad to have Mr. Briggs as a guest. Naomi added, with the slight hesitation of a person sharing a fact she felt she should share without being asked. Mr. Crawford has also indicated he would like to be present. He's been on the calendar for Miss Beaumont's home that afternoon for a separate trust review. Understood. I hung up. I called Walter back. We confirmed Monday at 2. I called the specialty moving service. We confirmed pickup at 12:30 on Monday for redelivery to Belle Meade. I called Loretta Briggs, no relation to Walter, common Tennessee surname. I confirmed she could keep Matteo through the afternoon and pick him up from kindergarten at Rosebank Elementary at 2:45. She had no problem with that. I spent the weekend preparing. On Monday, June 10th, at 2:08 in the afternoon, the Wurlitzer was reinstalled in the music room of the Beaumont home on Linwood Boulevard. Walter Briggs had arrived at 1:50, brought by a hired driver from his sister's house in Brentwood. Sienna had greeted him personally at the door. Naomi was there. Crawford was there, in the same navy blazer he had been wearing in May, with the same patient and slightly proprietary expression. I performed a final test of the mechanism with the cabinet open, confirmed all systems were nominal, and closed the front panel. I turned to Sienna. Miss Bowmont, I haven't played a record on this unit. I haven't pre-tested the selection that's set to play first. Whatever your grandmother left in slot A1 is what's going to play when I turn this key for the first time. What do you mean, whatever she left? I looked at Walter. Walter nodded. I said, Ma'am, the record in slot A1 is not a commercial pressing. It's a custom acetate from 1961. According to Mr. Briggs, it's a recording of your grandmother singing a song she wrote herself, in a studio his father ran in Memphis. She told his father that it would only be released on her own label, or not at all. She kept 3 copies. One of them has been in this jukebox since 1962. Sienna stood very still. Walter said, Ma'am, your grandmother came to me in January of 2018. She had me transfer one of her acetates to a digital file. She told me there was a person in her life she wanted to hear it someday when she was ready. She didn't say who. I think we both know now. Sienna sat down on the leather chair. She did not say anything. Crawford cleared his throat. This is all very moving, but I would suggest that before we play this recording, we ought to have it documented properly. Family historical materials of this kind should be cataloged and entered into the estate's archive records. There may be intellectual property considerations as well. He was reaching toward the Wurlitzer. Sienna stood up. Teddy, please sit down. She said it quietly. He sat down. She turned to me. Mr. Hartley, please play it. I turned the key. The mechanism engaged. The selection arm moved to A1. The 45 dropped into position. The needle settled. There was a half-second of vinyl hiss, and then a piano, soft and slow, and then a woman's voice, a low alto, full and unhurried, with the slight rasp of a singer who had smoked just enough to know how to use it. The song was 3 minutes and 41 seconds long. It was called, according to the typed label, By the River Slow. It was about a woman watching a river move past her house in the south, thinking about everything she had given up to stay. The melody was simple. The words were not. The piano was the only accompaniment. The room held its breath. Naomi was crying within 30 seconds. She did not move to wipe her face. Sienna was not crying. She was sitting forward on the leather chair with her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the Wurlitzer, listening with the focused stillness of a person who is meeting someone for the first time and the second time at once. Walter was sitting in the other chair with his eyes closed, smiling slightly, listening to a song he had not heard in over 60 years sound exactly the way he remembered his father playing back the rough mix in November of 1961. Crawford was looking at the floor. The song ended. The mechanism reset. The needle lifted. The 45 returned to its slot. The selection arm moved back to its home position. The room was silent. Sienna said, very quietly, "Play it again, please." I turned the key. We played it again. When it ended the second time, Sienna stood up. She walked to the Wurlitzer. She placed her hand on the cabinet for a moment, the way a person places a hand on the shoulder of someone who has come home after a long absence. Then she said, "Mr. Hartley, you mentioned you found something behind the selection card holder." "Yes, ma'am. I found a sealed envelope wedged in the cabinet space behind the selection mechanism. I left it where I found it. I wanted you to be the one to take it out." I opened the front panel. I reached behind the selection mechanism. The envelope was where I had wedged it back into position 3 weeks earlier. I removed it and handed it to Sienna. It was a standard letter-sized envelope, yellowed slightly, sealed with tape that had aged. The front of the envelope read, in careful, slow handwriting, "For Sienna, to be opened when the music returns." Sienna held it for a moment. She looked at me. She looked at Walter. She did not look at Crawford. She opened the envelope. She read the letter inside silently for what was probably 2 minutes. Her face did not change. She read it a second time. Then she set the letter down and unfolded the second document in the envelope. Then the third, then the fourth. When she finished, she put everything back in the envelope. She looked up at Crawford. "Teddy, I'd like you to leave my home, please." "Sienna, dear, what does the letter say? I really think for the integrity of the estate records I ought to—" "Theodore, leave, now." She did not raise her voice. He stood up. He looked at her for a long moment, calculating something I could see in his face without being able to name it. Then he picked up his briefcase and walked out of the music room. We heard the front door close. Sienna sat down on the leather chair. She said, to me and to Naomi and to Walter, "I would appreciate if all 3 of you would stay a little while longer. I'm going to need help understanding what I just read, and I would like to make some phone calls in this room with people present who knew my grandmother and have my interests at heart." We stayed. She called an attorney named Diane Mercer, who had handled a real estate matter for Bell Tower Records in 2022. Sienna spent 40 minutes on the phone with her. While she did, she let Naomi read the letter. Naomi sat on the floor in front of the Wurlitzer and read it slowly. When she finished, she said, with the quiet anger of an executive assistant who had been close to Margaret Bowmont for 9 years, "Sienna, that son of a bitch." I did not read the letter that day. It was not for me to read. But by the end of the afternoon, Sienna had shared with me, with Walter, and with Naomi the substance of what Margaret had written and what the supporting documents established. In the letter, Margaret had told her granddaughter, in language that was both loving and precise, that she had begun to suspect, in the last 2 years of her life, that Teddy Crawford had been quietly mismanaging the family trust. She had identified 7 specific real estate properties that she had purchased personally over the years, with her own funds, that were supposed to pass directly to Sienna outside the trust structure. Margaret had documented their original deeds, their personal payment records, and their proper title chain. She had also identified internal trust documents that Crawford had drafted absorbing those properties into trust assets that he then controlled. The total value of the 7 properties, by Margaret's own conservative estimate from 2018, was approximately $8.4 million. Margaret had hidden the envelope in the Wurlitzer because, as she wrote in the letter, "Teddy has eyes on every drawer and every safe in this house. He does not have eyes on this. And if you ever bring the music back, it means you are ready to hear what I could not say while I was alive." Diane Mercer arrived at the house at 6 o'clock that evening. By 8, she had reviewed the documents and confirmed Sienna's understanding. By the next morning, she had retained a forensic accountant named Adrian Falk, who specialized in fiduciary fraud cases. The civil complaint was filed on July 1, 2024, in Davidson County Chancery Court. The case was styled Bowmont v. Crawford et al. The allegations included breach of fiduciary duty, conversion, fraudulent conveyance, and self-dealing. Crawford was named personally, along with 2 LLCs through which Falk had traced asset absorption. Crawford was served on July 3, 2024, at his downtown Nashville law office. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation opened a parallel criminal inquiry by mid-July. Crawford was formally indicted by a Davidson County grand jury in early August on state charges of theft over $250,000 and breach of fiduciary duty. Given his standing in the legal community, his deep roots in Nashville, and the absence of flight risk, he was released on his own recognizance pending plea negotiations. On July 22, 2024, at 2:30 in the afternoon, Theodore Crawford walked into my workshop on Trinity Lane. I was alone. Matteo was at kindergarten. The workshop bay doors were open because it was a hot summer day, and I had been working on a 1956 Seeburg in Bay 1. Crawford was in a tan summer suit. His briefcase was in his right hand. He looked thinner than he had in June. "Mr. Hartley, I won't take much of your time." "Mr. Crawford, you should not be here." "I am here, Mr. Hartley, because I want to extend to you a professional courtesy. I am aware that you have been identified as a potential witness in the matter Ms. Bowmont has chosen to pursue. I am also aware that you are a single uncle raising a young child, that your workshop operates on modest margins, and that the next several years could be financially challenging." He set the briefcase on my workbench. He opened it. Inside was a banker's envelope. $50,000, Mr. Hartley, cash. In exchange, I ask only that your memory of the events of June 10th become a little less specific. You discovered an envelope. You did not see what was inside it. You don't recall the conversation that followed Mr. Crawford's departure. The kind of memory issues that are perfectly reasonable for a man who was hired to fix a jukebox and not to take notes on a family matter that was not his business. I did not look at the envelope. "Mr. Crawford, you should leave my workshop right now." "This is a one-time offer, Mr. Hartley. I am not coming back." "That works for me." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he closed the briefcase. He turned and walked out of the workshop without saying anything else. I heard his car door close. I heard the engine start. I heard him drive away. I called Diane Mercer's office within 5 minutes. By that evening, I had given a sworn statement to Detective Daniel Brennan of the Nashville Metro PD's White-Collar Crime Unit with parallel notice to the TBI. The bribery attempt was added to the criminal case as an additional charge of attempted obstruction of justice. The plea agreement was finalized on September 16, 2024. Theodore Crawford pleaded guilty to 1 count of theft over $250,000 and 1 count of attempted obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 8 years in the Tennessee Department of Correction. He agreed to civil restitution of $6.8 million, which was the recoverable amount after Falk's asset tracing identified what could be returned. He surrendered his license to practice law in Tennessee. He surrendered every fiduciary appointment he had held. I did not have to testify at trial because the case settled. I provided a deposition statement on August 15, 2024, that lasted 38 minutes. Diane Mercer was thorough. Crawford's defense attorney's cross-examination was brief. The Bowmont family recovered 6 of the 7 properties. The 7th had been sold, and the proceeds were partially recovered through Falk's tracing of Crawford's hidden accounts. Bell Tower Records released By the River Slow as a single on August 23, 2024. The recording was credited to Margaret Bowmont. All proceeds were directed to the Margaret Bowmont Foundation for Southern Music Education, a new initiative Sienna had established to provide music instruction to children in underserved Tennessee communities. The single received airplay on public radio across the country. It received a brief but glowing review in Rolling Stone magazine. Matteo and I listened to it together one evening in August, sitting on the kitchen floor with the radio on. Matteo had asked who was singing. I told him it was the grandmother of someone I had been helping. He listened to the whole song without speaking. When it ended, he said, "She sounds like she was nice." I told him I thought she was. Sienna came to my workshop on Friday, September 20th, 2024, at 5:30 in the afternoon. Matteo was there. Mrs. Briggs had an appointment that day, and Matteo had come with me to the shop after kindergarten. He was sitting at a small table in the corner I had set up for him, working on a balsa wood airplane model. Sienna parked in front. She was in jeans, a cream sweater, and the same kind of leather flats she had worn the first day I met her. She came in through the front. The bell over the door chimed. I looked up from the Seeburg I was finishing. "Mr. Hartley." "Sienna." She had two things with her, a vinyl record in a paper sleeve under one arm, and a small wooden box about 8 inches square in her other hand. She set them both on my workbench. The record was the first commercial pressing of By the River Slow. She told me she wanted me to have the first copy. The wooden box was a handcrafted harmonica case, made by a Nashville craftsman she knew. On the top, engraved in careful letters, was Matteo's full name. She opened the box. Inside was a brand-new Hohner Special 20 harmonica in the key of C, the kind teachers in Nashville used to teach beginners. The metal was gleaming. Sienna walked over to Matteo's table. She knelt down to his level. He looked up from his airplane. "Matteo, my name is Sienna. Your uncle helped me with something very important earlier this year, and I wanted to bring you a present to thank him." She showed him the case. She opened it. He looked at the harmonica inside. He looked at her. She said, "I know your daddy had a harmonica. Your uncle told me about it. This isn't your daddy's harmonica. Your daddy's harmonica is special, and you should keep it special. This is a brand new one, so you can learn to play. And then one day, when you're older and you know how to play, you can play your daddy's harmonica too." Matteo looked at the harmonica. He looked at the case with his name on it. He looked up at Sienna with the focused gravity that a 6-year-old applies to things that matter. "Thank you," he said. Then he smiled. The first time he had smiled at someone outside his small circle since his parents had died. Sienna stood up. She came back to the workbench. Matteo went back to his airplane. He kept glancing at the harmonica case on the corner of his table. Sienna spoke quietly. "Mr. Hartley, there's something I want to ask you. Bell Tower Records is opening a heritage department. We're going to be acquiring, preserving, and properly documenting vintage audio equipment, master tapes, and recording artifacts from Southern music history. We need a technical consultant. The position would be part-time, 20 hours a week, and would let you keep your workshop. The pay is fair. The work would be exactly the kind of work you used to do for Henry Caldwell at the State Museum, but with proper resources and a budget. I would like to think about it. That's all I'm asking." She nodded. She prepared to leave. At the door, she paused. "Jonah." It was the first time she had used my first name. "Yes. I owe you an apology for the joke, in May, about kissing you." "You don't." "I do. I didn't know who you were." "You weren't supposed to know. That's not what the work is for." She held my eyes for a moment. Across the workshop, Matteo looked up from his airplane. "Are you staying for dinner?" he asked Sienna. Sienna looked at me. She looked at Matteo. She knelt back down to his level. "Not tonight, sweet boy, but maybe another time if your uncle says it's okay. We'll see." Matteo accepted this with the practical seriousness of a child whose world had taught him that some things had to happen later. Sienna stood. She nodded to me once. She left. I stood at the workshop door watching her car pull away. Matteo came up next to me. He slid his small hand into mine. We watched her car turn out of the parking lot onto Trinity Lane and head west toward the river. He said, "She was nice." I said, "Yes, she was." We went back inside. He returned to his airplane. I returned to the Seeburg. The vinyl record of By the River Slow sat on my workbench. The first pressing. The first copy. Some kisses don't happen because they were never meant to be the point. Sometimes a joke that starts a day becomes a promise that ends a chapter, and the promise turns out to be about something else entirely. I didn't know yet what came next, But for the first time since the night of October 28, 2021, when I stood in a hospital corridor in Bowling Green, and a doctor told me my sister was gone, and her husband would be gone within the hour, and a 3-year-old boy in a house in Nashville had no idea his entire life had just been broken in half, I knew something was coming. And that, for now, was enough. So, here's my question for you. If you had been Jonah that afternoon in May, hearing a wealthy stranger joke about kissing you in front of her staff, would you have walked out? Would you have taken offense? Or would you have done what he did and let the work answer for itself? Tell me in the comments. I read every one, and if this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of someone in your life who has been quietly carrying losses and skills you didn't know about, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Because the people who do the real work usually don't tell you they're doing it. You have to learn to listen for it. The way you'd listen for a song that hasn't been played in 60 years, waiting on the other side of a key.